Let's talk about justice. In America, there are at least two ideas of what justice is and what justice is not, and what questions are asked in pursuit of justice. One is our current criminal legal system. Justice here is defined as punishment. When something happens, an act of harm, an act of violence, the scales of justice are imbalanced. And the belief in our current criminal legal system is the way to repair that balance, to bring back restoration, is through punishment. So justice defined in this first system is through punishment. And it asks the question, what crime happened and how do we punish that person? What I'm calling for is something different. What this tool is calling for is something else. It's a different idea of justice. It's a reimagined idea of justice. Ultimately, it's a biblical idea of justice. In this other system, justice is not punishment, but justice is safety, healing, and accountability. Justice is something that is incredibly important to God. I think about in Psalm 89 how justice is spoken of as being one of the foundations of God's throne. But it's important we know what justice is. In both of these systems, justice as punishment, justice as safety, healing, and accountability, there's a belief that there are scales of justice, and when harm or violence or when crime happens, there's an imbalance. But what brings about that balance, what brings about restoration or healing, is different. In system one, it is punishment. In the other system, it's healing. It is that act of restoration that actually brings back that balance in these scales of justice. Think about three groups within a triangle: the person who did the harm, the person who was harmed, and a surrounding community. All three of those groups need something. Our current criminal legal system believes and says that justice is served all of those individuals, and it's served by doing safety, healing, and accountability, when in actuality, it's not doing those things at all. In this other version of justice that we're talking about, where justice is safety, healing, and accountability, and where restoration is brought about by pursuing those things, here's what that can look like. For the person who did the harm, that person needs some measure of accountability. Accountability is not synonymous with punishment, or it shouldn't be. Holding someone accountable should actually mean we pursue that person's good and the good of all involved. Accountability means three things, and it's ARC. It's an acronym which helps me remember it: acknowledgement, repair, and change. What that means is that the person who has done the harm acknowledges what they've done. It requires empathy. They acknowledge what they've done and they acknowledge the impact that it's had on the person that they've harmed. Repair is also important and necessary. Repair means some action done by the person who did the harm toward the person who was harmed. But that action isn't imprisonment, life without parole, or execution. That action is something that will bring about repair for the person who is harmed. And that action is best dictated by the person who was harmed, the very person who is never centered within our criminal legal system. The people who are harmed and go through our criminal legal system are often not centered, they're often re-traumatized, and their opinion isn't sought in what is it that is brought against or towards the person who did the harm. So that person needs acknowledgement, repair, and then the third piece is change. Something needs to change in that person's life, either individually or even systemically, so that that harm can't happen again. The people who were harmed need healing, some measure of healing and some measure of hope, which doesn't mean forgetting what has been done, but it means engaging it, thinking through that and thinking about what would healing look like on multiple levels of body and of someone's spiritual healing. The last piece is safety. The physical bodily safety of the surrounding community. The surrounding community has a stake in this as well when harm happens. So justice is not punishment, but it's safety, healing, and accountability. And these two systems ask two different questions. Remember, that first system asks, who did the crime and who do we punish? But this other system of Justice Reimagined asks, what harm was done and how can there be healing brought from that? I also think about Micah 6:8, this verse that talks about acting justly and loving mercy. This verse calls people to love something and then to act out of that. And we see, as people who have our identity rooted in Christ, we see Christ's act of reconciliation giving us the ability to live a life of reconciliation with others. And reconciliation is actually the opposite of being soft on crime. That is the hardest work that can be done, to work towards some measure of repair and healing with individuals who have done harm. And I also think about, and I'll close with this, with Psalm 10, where we're called to break the arm of the wicked. That's intense language when it's talking about when injustice happens. We are told as Christians to pursue that, to stop that, and to work to bring about its healing. That's what we get to do here on earth. We get to see the inbreaking of the kingdom. We get to see a measure of shalom that's brought here when we pursue not punishment for others, but safety, healing, and accountability.